Today, class, let's begin our discussion of Chapter 5, Employee Selection, References, and Testing. The learning objectives. Understand why references typically don't predict performance. Understand how to choose the right type of employment test for a particular situation. Be able to describe the different types of tests used to select employees. Be able to create and score a biodata instrument. Why check references? Ultimately, if we collect data, which is an expense, we want it to be useful. Otherwise, what is the point of the activity? So references should have some value add to the selection process. That is, tell us something useful about the potential employee. Well, checking references is going to be important to that. A reference check is the process of confirming the accuracy of resume and job application information. The reference is the expression of an opinion, either orally or through a written checklist, regarding an applicant's ability, previous performance, work habits, character, or potential for future success. When someone writes a letter of recommendation, it is a letter expressing that opinion regarding the applicant's ability, performance, habits, character, and the possibility of how successful they will be. The issue that we have at hand here is resume fraud. This is the intentional placement of untrue information on a resume. So these are some of the reasons why we want to check references: to root out fraud, to find new information about the applicant, check for potential discipline problems, and predict future performance. So why do we check for resume fraud? Listen to this. 1/3 of resumes contain inaccurate information. Over 500,000 people have bogus degrees. We want to go about verifying information, the truth, the errors, the embellishments, and the fabrications. Sometimes we want to look to see what kind of missing information there is. Was it an unintentional omission? Was it strategic or deceptive? We have alternative methods. We have bogus application items, social security reports, and we can hire professional reference checkers as well. There's a variety of ways in which we can try to check for issues with people's resume. Now, getting information can be difficult. Organizations are interested in knowing about their potential employees more so than they are willing to share about their former employees. It's sort of a I will ask, but I will not tell approach. Here we see the percentage asking and the percentage telling. So we have employment dates. Just about everyone asks for that, 97%. And 98% of those are also wanting to be able to release that. So they have no issue with that information. Eligibility for rehire. 64% ask, but only around 42% will release that type of information. Let's go down to near the bottom here. Reason for leaving. 94% ask for this information about potential employees, but only 19% of the organizations are willing to release that type of information. So you can see here, information is very important, wanting to know the information and wanting to hold on to the information. There are several reasons why it is that organizations are going to be somewhat reluctant to release information to other organizations. Finding new information about the applicant. So we have types of information, finding out things like personality, interpersonal style, background, work habits. Problems. References seldom agree. People act in different ways in different situations. Alternative measures, psychological tests, the letters of recommendation, biodata, which uses application blanks that contain questions that research shows predict job performance, resumes, and interviews. All of this are ways in which we can find more and additional information about our applicants. Now, checking for potential discipline problems. We have criminal records, previous employers, motor vehicle records, military records, credit reports, colleges and universities, neighbors and friends. All of these are potential sources for trying to find out about potential problems of possible employees. Criminal records obtained from local and state agencies. We check with each jurisdiction. Only convictions can be used. This is based on an EEOC decision. A reasonable amount of time between release and decision to hire. In using convictions, employer must consider the nature and gravity of offense, the amount of time that has passed since the conviction and or completion of the sentence, the nature of the job held or being sought. So basically, we can use criminal record information, but there are certain types of criteria and standards and things we should consider in doing so. Then there are credit checks. The purpose of credit checks are to predict the motivation to steal and or determine the character of the applicant. We have the Fair Credit Reporting Act, ordered through a consumer reporting agency, CRA. Provide written notice to applicant that you will be checking their credit. Get applicants written authorization to credit check. And if adverse action is to be taken, provide the applicant with pre-adverse action disclosure, which includes a copy of the credit report. Inform applicant they will not be hired due to credit check, and provide the name of CRA and notice of applicant, rights to appeal within 60 days. Predicting future performance. References are not good predictors of performance. You can see the uncorrected validity is quite low. References are not reliable. You see the correlation there. High correlation between two letters written by the same person for two people than between letters written by two people for the same person. So they say more about the person writing the letter than the person being written about. And also, references are lenient. Fewer than 1% of the applicants are rated below average, which, of course, is an impossibility. So, why the leniency? Well, applicants often choose their own references. So, obviously, if you're trying to get references, you want good ones. And so you tend to select individuals who you believe or think will give you a really good reference. Applicants often have the right to see their files. Former employers fear legal ramifications, therefore greater leniency. There's another issue too regarding references. References often have a limited opportunity to view behavior. So those people completing the information, providing the references, don't always have access to the behavioral information that would make the references more legitimate. When someone behaves, we can only observe and process and think about so much of it, those behaviors. And then we only remember a certain amount of those behaviors. And then we are enticed to remember yet additional information. We can recall only a set amount of that relevant data. So what you see here, we have this whole host of possible behaviors, and we only observe a smaller portion of it. And then we have only the ability to think about some of those behaviors and process it. And we have access to only a smaller portion of that, which we actually remember. And then we were enticed to try to get more information from our memory. We can go ahead and fish it out and recall even a smaller portion of those behaviors. So we have an issue basically that amounts to an issue of memory. We don't always have that information available to us about the variety of behaviors that a potential reference individual display during a certain time frame. Then we have potential legal ramifications. Why are employers so skittish about providing information about previous employees? Why are organizations worried about hiring a bad apple? Well, let's look at this from both the organization doing the hiring, okay, and the organization who is supplying information about their former employee. First, we have negligent hiring, a situation in which an employee with a previous criminal record commits a crime as part of his or her employment. We have invasion of privacy, the intrusion of solitude, the appropriation of a name or likeness, public disclosure of private facts, or defamation, putting something in a false light. We have a negligent reference, an organization's failure to meet its legal duty to supply relevant information to a prospective employer about a former employee's potential for legal trouble. And of course, defamation, the action of damaging someone's good reputation. This is determined by 1. Demonstrably and objectively false information, 2. Seen or heard by a public third party, and 3. Quantifiably injurious to that person. So this either prevented them from getting a raise, a promotion, or something. So that's what we look at by factors of defamation. What all of this really amounts to is this. Either as the organization that's doing the hiring or reporting on a former employee, these are potential areas of legal jeopardy. So when it comes to defamation, 3 types: libel, written; slander, oral; and then self-publication. Employers have a conditional privilege that limits their liability. A conditional privilege may attach where several persons have a common interest in a matter and have a need to communicate with one another about the matter. In many states, employers enjoy a qualified privilege that permits them to give defamatory references. The privilege attaches if the following conditions are satisfied. The reference is made with a good faith belief in the truth of the statements. The reference serves a legitimate business need. The statements are made only to persons with a legitimate interest in hearing the reference, and the reference is made only on a proper occasion. Thus, if the reference is not made with malice, that is, knowing or reckless disregard for the truth, and if the reference is limited to legitimate business interest and to legitimate business audience, the reference may enjoy a qualified privilege. Normally, what we want to try to do when we're talking about former employees, for example, is limit comments to true statements that are objective and verifiable. All statements should be supported by evidence found in the former employee's personnel file. All negative claims should be investigated for accuracy. Employers will not be liable if their statements were truthful. Statements were true, not true, but reasonably person would have believed them to be true. Opinions are protected unless reference infers opinion is based on facts that don't exist. It's made for a legitimate purpose, made in good faith. Don't offer unsolicited information. Statements cannot be made for revenge. Avoid personal comments. Made with the permission of the applicant. Use waivers. Let the former employee know if the reference will not be positive. So here are a couple of examples. You do not say he performed poorly. Instead, you could say he achieved the company quota 30% of the time. The company average is 92%. Do not say she's not a team player. Instead, say on 12 occasions she was asked to perform an extra task to fill an unexpected need. She refused each time. Don't say he is violent and disrespectful. Instead, say he punched a supervisor in the nose. Do not say she is not dedicated. Instead, say she worked 1 hour of overtime in 2 years. So the idea here is that if you're going to make some sort of statement, be sure the statement is rooted in fact, something that is observable or at least can be observed in record keeping and very objective as much as possible. There are extraneous factors surrounding the reference. So these are things which also need to be considered as well. So we need to consider, for example, the reference giver's ability to articulate. How well can they speak? The extent to which the referee remembers the applicant. The words used by the reference giver. Certain types of things would be very, very problematic if they were uttered by someone providing a reference. Cuter than a baby's butt. No sexual oddities that I'm aware of. I have an intimate and caring relationship with the applicant. So the idea here, okay, even though the terms are really weird here, the notion is these things are extraneous factors and probably should be noted as to take some of the sting away, so to speak, from a reference that's providing someone for a potential employee. So we need to be an understanding of extraneous factors surrounding the reference as well. Employee selection methods. Training and education, experience, knowledge, ability, skills, personality and character, and medical. All of these can serve as methodologies for personnel selection. So, predicting performance using training and education. Well, what it comes down to is the following. Better education leads to the following. Increased performance, increased citizenship behavior, decreased absenteeism. In fact, they look at grade point average as being able to predict several things. GPA in the first few years after graduation is best, but we do see that GPA using to predict future performance also tends to have an increase in adverse impact. Does education predict performance? From these summaries of meta-analyses, we can see that there is some evidence of this. Education seems to impact police and military performance, as we can see here, with the study by Weinberg and Joyner, as well as Amat. Then we have education and incremental validity. Overall, the three combinations with the highest multivariate validity and utility for job performance were general mental ability, GMA, plus a work sample, GMA plus an integrity test, and GMA, again, general mental ability, plus a structured interview. The issue of incremental validity is perhaps less important for selection interviews than it is for other methods of assessment. Given that an interview forms the bulk of many selection processes, the fact that it captures data on individual differences that are also captured by other selection methods is perhaps desirable. So, in a nutshell, what it basically means is your general mental ability or intelligence seems to have some significant role in predicting performance. So, the validity of GPA. GPA is a valid predictor of performance. The job, training performance, starting salary, promotion, and grad school performance can be predicted by one's GPA. GPA is most predictive in the first few years after graduation. It will result in higher levels of adverse impact, however. And also, people with high GPAs are usually intelligent and/or conscientious. So here we see validity of GPA meta-analysis results. Again, we see some significant things here. Work-related criteria related to job performance. Looking at salary, starting and current salaries. And performance in grad school. So, a few lingering questions. Is the validity of education job specific? What is the actual incremental validity of education over cognitive ability? Why would education predict performance? Is it knowledge, liberal arts skills, mental ability, or motivation? So, predicting performance using other things like applicant knowledge, it taps into job-related knowledge. We do see some good validity. It has face validity, but it can have some adverse impact. Predicting performance using applicant ability. Cognitive ability test. High validity, as we've seen earlier. It predicts training and job performance for all jobs. But it also notes this. The more complex the job, the better cognitive ability test predicts performance. So we have some strengths. High validity for all selection measures. It is easy to administer, relatively inexpensive. Most are not time consuming. Weaknesses. It is likely to cause adverse impact. It can have a low face validity, and it's usually not well liked by the applicants who have to complete them. We also have perceptual ability tests, looking at such things as vision, near, far, night, and peripheral vision, depth perception, glare sensitivity, and so on. Psychomotor ability tests like dexterity, control precision, multi-limb coordination, arm-hand steadiness, wrist-finger speed, speed of limb movement, and so on. And physical abilities, used for jobs with high physical demands. 3 issues are going to be job relatedness, what the passing scores are going to be, and when the ability must be present. The 2 common ways to measure are through simulations and physical agility tests. So other physical abilities, dynamic strength, trunk strength, explosive strength, static strength, and so on. The idea with these last few, these perceptual, psychomotor, and physical abilities, these things sometimes are going to have some potential adverse impact based on gender. And sometimes what they do is they'll change the passing scores for one group so that it's less than the other group. For example, women may have to do less compared to men going for the same job. Predicting performance using applicant skill. We have work samples. Applicants perform tasks that replicate actual job tasks. Advantages, directly related to the job, good criterion validity, good face validity, less adverse impact, and provides a realistic job preview. These are great. Why don't we do them all the time? Well, a disadvantage. They can be expensive to develop and to maintain, especially if you have to use specialized equipment. I mean, you have to have equipment that can do the same thing that equipment on the main floor of the factory, for example, can do. So you have to have one off to the side, or you have to take one offline so that somebody can do a work sample. So there are some disadvantages to these types of methodologies for selecting people. Then there are assessment centers. Okay, an assessment center, a selection technique that uses multiple job-related assessment exercises and multiple assessors to observe and record behaviors of candidates performing job-related tasks. They're based on job analysis, the behavioral classification, assessment techniques using multiple assessment exercises and simulations, multiple assessors, assessor training, recording the behavior, generating reports, and then an overall judgment based on the integration of information. So some of the assessment center exercises are the leaderless group discussions to see potential leadership skills that may reveal themselves in such groups. The in-basket technique, where you go into an office, sit down at the desk, and there's an in-basket with a bunch of documents there. You review each document and you write out the instructions, for example, to a subordinate that will have to conduct and carry out what you instruct them to do. Simulations, situational exercises, and work samples. You can also participate in role plays, be given case studies to analyze, and business games to execute. So the idea is they give you a whole variety of things that will simulate to some extent the types of things people will be involved in during their actual work day. The evaluation of assessment centers, reliability. It can have low inter-rater agreement among raters, so those assessors may not always agree with one another. The test-retest reliability, however, is pretty high. Validity, we see uncorrected 0.28, corrected 0.38, and it does have some good face validity. I mean, being someone who's been in sort of a supervisory role before, a lot of your activity will be very similar to an in-basket activity. You have documents that need to be reviewed, you need to make decisions based on them, and send the instructions back down. Weaknesses of assessment centers: they are very expensive and very time consuming. And again, you have low inter-rater agreement. Behaviors can overlap into several dimensions. Safety of candidates for some work samples may be a question as well. I mean, you have to do certain types of things. If you're going to be working on expensive and dangerous equipment, you have to work on expensive and dangerous equipment. That's going to be the problem, because you're going to be using some sort of work sample as part of it. So when are assessment centers most appropriate? They are most useful for promotion rather than selection. So you already have access to all the individuals. They are already on your payroll. You put them to an assessment center to determine which one of them are going to be likely candidates for a new promotion that's going to be opening up, or a new position. All right, so that's what they're really good for. These in-house potential candidates for a position. When candidates have some knowledge of the job, when you have the money to develop and maintain assessment centers, when you have the time and trainers to do so as well. Predicting performance using prior experience. Experience ratings. Past behavior predicts future behavior. I'm sure you've heard of this already before. So the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So we do see experience as a valid predictor of future performance. When we look at experience, we need to also note that experience goes into at least two types of categories here. Work experience, which is obvious. You're trying to get a job, for example, and you want to look at your previous work experience, but also life experience as well. What you do as a hobby, what you do as volunteer work. Some of those things are going to be quite relatable to the types of experience that we're actually looking for an open position that you're going to be a candidate for. So experience can be found in life experiences as well, not just work experience. We can evaluate experience in a variety of ways. We use the application blanks, resumes, interviews, reference checks, and biodata instruments to really tap into experience. But there are some things that research suggests we need to consider. We need to consider, for example, how much experience is going to be necessary. How well did the person perform? How related is it to the current job? Experience predicts best. Credit prior work experience only, in the same occupational area as in which the performance is being predicted, and the performance of tasks or functions that have direct application on the job. Recency of experience should be used as a decision rule for awarding credit only when justified on a case-by-case basis. Credit for duration of work experience should be limited to a few years. High prediction up to about 3 years of experience. Declining to low prediction for more than 12 years experience. So, some concerns. Sullivan 2000 claims that experience in solving past problems is rapidly losing its applicability to current and future problems. Organizations will increase their applicant pool if they delete the, quote, ancient history, end quote, requirements. That is, 10 years experience required. So if you eliminate that, then your applicant pool, the people that you can choose from for a position, really does increase greatly. So reduce or eliminate the number of years required in your ads and replace them with the demonstrated ability to solve problems with our required level of difficulty. Use simulations and actual problems to assess applicants. Develop future-oriented questions for applicants. Train evaluators and compensation professionals to put less weight on experience of candidates. Revise job descriptions to include level of difficulty. Identify the amount and type of experience and competencies that would predict job performance. Check to see if there is a correlation between the number of years of experience an employee has and their success in your firm. So, performance matters. Haven't done doesn't mean can't do. Experience has a shelf life. Listing something on a resume is not experience. Where you get your experience matters. Experience does not, I repeat, does not guarantee success. Experience tends to be expensive. The more experience someone has, usually the greater their salary requirements. More experience might be bad. If you have loads and loads, years and years of experience on a certain process, and that process is now an older process, well, having all that experience may not be a good thing because the organization, the industry has moved to a different type of process. So again, experience is good and important, but you need to take all these items in consideration. Biodata. Biodata is a selection method that considers an applicant's life, school, military, community, and work experience. Here are some examples of some biodata. It'll ask questions about work, life, and things of that nature that we just saw in the previous slide. For example, member of high school student government, yes or no? Number of jobs in the past 5 years, 1, 2, 3 to 5, or more than 5. Transportation to work, walk, bus, bike, own car, or other. So again, the idea is that they've done research, and this research has identified certain types of questions that seem to be quite predictive of job performance. So how do you go about this? Development of biodata items. Well, you choose a job. You create a pool of potential biodata items. Choose a criterion to measure behavior. Pre-screen items and test on employees. Retest items on a second sample of employees. So some of the items that we've talked about before about how we develop certain types of processes within an organization to support the aims and activities of an industrial organizational psychologist, for example. Here are some biodata standards. We have good biodata items on the left column and bad biodata items on the right. So let's look at a couple of these real quickly here. Historical. How old were you when you got your first paying job? External. Did you ever get fired from a job? Objective. How many hours did you study for the bar exam? Firsthand. How punctual are you about coming to work? Bad biodata items. Future or hypothetical. What position do you think you will be holding in 10 years? Internal. What is your attitude toward friends who smoke marijuana? Subjective. Would you describe yourself as shy? Secondhand. How would your teachers describe your punctuality? So we see here, by way of good and bad examples, these are example biodata items that could be employed as part of a process to establish a biodata at your organization. They should be discrete, verifiable, controllable, equal access, job relevant, and non-invasive. Let's look at the bottom. Non-invasive. Were you on the tennis team in college? Or invasive. How many young children do you have at home? Bad biodata item. So, when it comes to biodata scoring, we have here what is known as a vertical percentage method for scoring biodata, in which the percentage of unsuccessful employees responding in a particular way is subtracted from the percentage of successful employees responding in the same way. The percentage of a particular response for the low group is subtracted from the percentage of the same response in the high group to obtain the weight for that item. So as we look at this particular document here, we see we have high school is weighted with a unit of -1, so not so great. Bachelor's, you get a +1 weighting. And master's didn't seem to have any impact at all, so it's a 0 weighting. The strengths of biodata. Good validity, and it can predict for a variety of criterion measures. It's easy to administer. relatively inexpensive, fairly valid, and can have good face validity. Not always, however. There can be some with low face validity, and that's a weakness. It can be invasive of privacy. Items can be seen as offensive. It can be expensive to develop and not always practical to develop. And there are some concerns dealing with validity. It's good validity, but we just aren't quite sure why. Validity also seems to drop when items are based rationally on job analysis rather than empirically. So that's also something that is very concerning and questioning. Predicting performance using personality, interest, and character. Personality is a collection of traits that persist across time and situations and differentiate one person from another. Here are types of personality inventories. We have measures of normal personality and then measures of psychopathology. So the first one, normal personality, just determining the different types of qualities and traits and other factors dealing with one's personality for a normal population. Whereas the one dealing with psychopathology, these are people who may have some issues. It is the basis for personality dimensions. Is it theory-based, statistically based, or empirically based? Is the scoring objective or projective? And then there's the 5-factor model. After many, many years of research in the area of personality, researchers began to notice that several things seem to always appear or come to the forefront. And these became known as the 5-factor model or the Big Five, because these areas, these factors kept appearing in all the personality research. Openness to experience, imaginative, curious, cultured, conscientiousness, organized, disciplined, careful, extroversion, outgoing, gregarious, fun-loving, agreeableness, trusting, cooperative, flexible, neuroticism or emotional stability, anxious, insecure, vulnerable to stress. So what we look at, the validity of personality factors, we're looking at the Big Five here again. If you had a business or an organization and you had a personality test based on the Big Five, for example, and you gave it to potential candidates, if you had one to choose from, which one would it be? On which one of these factors would they score high on? Would you say, okay, I want the ones who score high on this particular factor? Which one would it be? Most of you will realize it's going to be conscientiousness. They seem to have the greatest impact overall, for the most part, through these particular studies. And basically, conscientiousness, again, is organized, disciplined, and careful. And these are the ones that usually, this factor is the one that usually is going to be associated with people's performance at work. Evaluation of personality. Strengths: relatively cheap, easy to administer, little adverse impact, predicts best when based on a job analysis. Weaknesses: scale development, validity, and faking. Interest inventories tap an applicant's interest in particular types of work or careers. Poor predictors of job performance, but better predictors of job satisfaction. Integrity tests estimate the probability that an applicant will steal money or merchandise, used mostly in retail, but gaining acceptance for other occupations. We have electronic testing, the polygraph testing, paper and pencil testing, overt personality based. Now let's look at polygraph a little bit more closely here. The polygraph is a lie detector. It is a machine that measures the physiological responses that accompany the verbal responses an individual makes to a direct questions asked by a polygraph operator. The emotions other than guilt can trigger responses. This is a limitation to the polygraph. Countermeasures can be used to help avoid detection. And there are frequencies of false positives as well as frequency of false negatives. So here's some legal guidelines for polygraph testing in the work environment. Employee Polygraph Protection Act of 1988 makes it illegal to directly or indirectly require an employee to take a polygraph, use, accept, refer to, or inquire about the results of any polygraph test of an applicant or employee, discharge, discipline, discriminate against, or deny employment or promotion to, or threaten such actions against any prospective or current employee who refuses, declines, or fails to take or submit to a polygraph. And here are the exemptions. The following are exempt to these prohibitions. Private employers providing security services. Employers who manufacture, distribute, or dispense controlled substances. And the big one, federal, state, and local government employees. Paper and pencil integrity tests. Overt integrity tests directly ask for attitudes about theft and occurrences of theft behavior. Personality-based measures measures traits linked to several theft-related employee behaviors and are detrimental to the organization. The overt integrity test, the rationale is to measure job applicants' attitudes and cognitions toward theft that might predispose them to steal at work, especially when both the need and opportunity to steal are present. Researchers have shown that the typical employee thief is more tempted to steal, engages in many common rationalizations for theft, would punish thieves less, often thinks about theft-related activities, attributes more theft to others, shows more inter-thief loyalty, is more vulnerable to peer pressure to steal than an honest employee. Personality-based integrity measures. Employee theft is just one element in a larger syndrome of antisocial behavior or organizational delinquency. Therefore, overt integrity tests overlook a number of other counterproductive behaviors that are costly to the organization, such as these types of integrity tests can predict drug and alcohol abuse, vandalism, sabotage, assault behaviors, insubordination, absenteeism, excessive grievances, bogus worker compensation claims, and violence. The validity and reliability of integrity tests. Theft, 0.41 for predicting probable theft by employees. We have seen some other dealing with performance, not as strong. And then reliability. Reports of test retest reliabilities are between 0.9 and 0.7. So the evaluation of integrity tests. The advantages. Potentially good validity, inexpensive to use, easy to administer, little to no racial adverse impact. Disadvantages. Males have a higher fail rate than females. Younger people have a higher fail rate than older people, and failure has a negative psychological impact on applicants. Conditional reasoning test, designed to reduce faking. Applicants are given a series of statements and asked to select the reason that justifies each statement. Aggressive individuals tend to believe most people have harmful intentions, sort of a hostile attribution bias, believe it is too important to show strength or dominance in social interactions, a potency bias, believe it is important to retaliate when wronged rather than to try to maintain a relationship, a retribution bias, tend to believe powerful people will victimize less powerful individuals, a victimization bias, tend to believe evil people deserve to have bad things happen to them, a derogation of target bias, and tend to believe social customs restrict free will and should be ignored, social discounting bias. Graphology is a concept that a person's handwriting is a reflection of his or her personality and character. I'm surprised to see even 6,000 U.S. organizations use them. 75% of organizations in France, 8% in the United Kingdom. There are very few evaluative studies on some of this. Validity depends on the writing samples from one study, whether it's autobiographical writing or non-autobiographical. Predictive performance using drug tests, psychological screening, and medical exams. Drug testing. Use in 2001, 80% of U.S. organizations tested for drugs. In 2003, 4.6% of applicants tested positive for drugs. In 2007, 8.2% of employees admitted to using drugs in the past month. Drug users are more likely to miss work, use healthcare benefits, be fired, and have an accident. Forms of testing. Pre-employment testing, random selection at predetermined times, random selection at random times, and testing after an accident or disciplinary action. So, of course, you have the process that happens before you're even offered the position. And then when you have the position, there may be predetermined times or random times in which you are going to be selected to provide samples for testing. And of course, if you are involved, and let's say you're a bus driver and you're involved in a bus accident, then you will be required to take drug testing after the accident to see, of course, if there was any drugs that were possibly contributing factors to the accident. Responses to the presence of drugs. 98% of job offers were withdrawn if pre-screening did detect drugs were present. For current employees who test positive, 25% are fired after a positive test, and 66% are referred to counseling and treatment. Two stages of drug testing that normally occur. We have the initial screening of hair or urine, and then we have a confirmation test, typically used only after a positive initial screening. So the first drug test detects there's something there, and then a more thorough one happens later to confirm. Typical corrective validity coefficient. So we've gone through a lot of data here so far today, and we want to look at the corrective validity of each one of the items that we've looked at here. The most powerful one that we see here is listed as the structured interview at 0.57, followed by cognitive ability, then biodata, then job knowledge, and then work samples, and so on. And we see here at the other end, interest inventories, handwriting analysis, projective personality tests, very, very, very low validity. And then let's look at adverse impact. Here we can see cognitive ability has a great deal of adverse impact for white as well as white-black relation as well as white-Hispanic. We see GPA, work sample. All of these have great adverse impact potentials.